The reality now hits home as we reflect on the most recent research that has come out of Yale University, and it's sending shockwaves through the mainstream media community. Things that they should have been talking about for some time, they haven't really addressed. And so, essentially, what I'll be talking about today, there are a few things I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be taking a cursory look at this Yale study. This is what it's talking about: immunological and antigenic signatures associated with chronic illnesses after COVID 19 vaccination. This is technically what they call post-vaccination syndrome. It's a new term that they're coining finally after all these years. But it has sent shockwaves, as I said, throughout the community because here is what you see in the Daily Mail at the moment. Vaccine victims left disabled after taking COVID jab react to bombshell Yale study that found shots cause extreme body changes. This is the reality. And it's quite remarkable because I anticipated this in the sense that I've been looking at the research for some time. And I had always asked, all the way from 2021, once I started to see that there were some people who had adverse responses to vaccination, very similar to long COVID, you could almost not differentiate them. And the question was, is how is this possible? How can the infection cause long COVID? And how can the vaccination cause a symptom or a pattern of disease that is almost exactly the same as long COVID? We saw a similar thing with Bruce Patterson, and he was doing research and noticing a similar pattern, which he called long vax. So this has been there in the background for some time. But just recently, I did a very important analysis. And what I did is I asked the question, what about the concept of spike detox? Does everyone need one? And I literally did this in the past 2 weeks, putting together all the science, reviewing it. If you want to take a look, register below. There is a link to this course. It's a very important course, which kind of predated and anticipated where the research was going. And I am trying to move ahead of the science. I'm not waiting on the science to catch up. So make sure you take a look at that because it has some very, very important concepts that you need to address. So, what I'll be doing is I'll be doing a short video, which I'm going to be using in relation to the fact that if people are interested in what I've been looking at in terms of the spike detox protocol, as I said, I've been moving ahead of the science. So, here we have, there's a link in the description where you can register your interest in the approach that I take in terms of the concept of spike detox protocol. And the important thing you have to remember is that once you understand the science around it, once you put the pieces together, there are ways that we can remove this. But it is not easy and it takes time. And we have to figure out who is affected, and different people are affected in different ways. There's so many layers to this that have to be addressed that really, really are very, very important. So, what I'll do is I'm going to do a quick recording. At the end of that, when I say recording, it's just going to be I'm going to use that snip of the this discussion to put on a landing page so that you can know more about it if somebody didn't watch this video. But once I'm finished that, if people have questions, this is one of those days where I'll try and take a few questions. I'll try and share the link so that you can jump in. And again, there's simple rules about how we interact. Simple question, ask your question. I can't let you go on for too long because other people may want to talk. If nobody wants to talk, that's fine. I'm happy with closing out at the end. But let's get back to a few concepts that I want to share with you with regards to why I think that this is such an important piece of the puzzle. So just work with me over the next 5 minutes. I am Dr. Philip McMillan. I have been working and focusing on COVID 19 since 2020. And in this time, I have always tried to find answers to questions that, even though they may be inconvenient, are very, very important. And in this context, I've been focusing on the idea of the spike detox. If you have come here, it indicates that you are interested in learning more. You may be concerned. You may have ongoing symptoms. You want to try and see if you can optimize your health again. If you understand the science and understand the principles that we are trying to target, it will help you to understand my approach with regards to that concept of the McMillan root spike detox. There's an important point in here when I say the root spike detox. What you can see here is that I've got the healthy tree at the top and the roots going down here. Very often, people are only interested in the symptoms. My belief is that if you address the root, the leaves and the tree will be healthy. And that's really the approach that I'm taking in relation to the concept of spike detox. And that's part of what I call the root roadmap. That's the way that you get your optimal health. Review, observe, optimize, target. That's the principle of addressing your health generally. It's not necessarily any different with regards to the spike detox. There are some details that we have to do differently. And when we look at the timeline, we can see why this takes so long. Basic parts about reducing inflammation and detox pathways, optimizing autophagy and cellular clearance, overhauling the endothelial and vascular health, and then transforming the immunity for long term recovery. And you can see here that this is easily over 9 weeks, depending on the person. And this is not necessarily a straightforward principle. But the point is that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon because getting better takes time. Here is an important thing that came out of the paper, and it's something for you to reflect on. When we look carefully at what it said, this study revealed that 34.4% of all the participants had detectable spike protein in circulation. The levels were higher in people who had post vaccination syndrome, but it was present in 1 in 3 people, whether or not they had symptoms. Let me repeat that. Whether or not they had symptoms. So they had a control group that didn't have symptoms, and 30% of them still had evidence of spike protein circulation. That's serious. That's very, very important because the spike protein can literally end up anywhere. When I did the course recently on spike protein detox, I addressed some of these points with regards to where the spike protein could be located. Literally, immune cells in the organs, in other tissues, in the circulatory system, lymphatic system, the endothelial and vascular system. This spike protein seems to have the capacity to bind to multiple proteins, and this is what makes it so sticky. And this is why it's so hard to get rid of. It's almost like honey. If you spill it, it just sticks to everything. Or toffee in your teeth when you eat toffee. It takes so much time to get it out because it's so sticky. That's the challenge that we have to face. And what it means is that if you have ongoing circulation, wherever it's coming from, it can stick to other tissues and trigger immune responses. That's the challenge that we have. Who is affected? And if they are affected, how significant is that those effects? This is part of the question. Some people say that, well, does it even matter if they have spike protein persistence? To me, it has to matter because people are symptomatic with it. Now, the fact that some people may not appear to have symptoms doesn't necessarily mean that it's not causing damage. That's the principle of hypertension, the silent killer. Just because you have no symptoms with your blood pressure doesn't mean that it's not going to cause you health harm. The same approach we have to take with regards to the spike protein. When we look at this study here, this was looking again at spike protein persistence in skull and meninges, but this one was after infection. And what they were looking at here is what happened with the Wuhan spike protein. They compared it to influenza, which was primarily in the lungs of these mice. But when they injected the spike protein in mice, goodness gracious, it literally went everywhere. This is a beast of a protein, and it really can cause all kinds of inflammatory processes. And in my view, this is why it needs to be removed. We've got to figure out what is going on. One of the biggest areas that I'm concerned about is the area of the immune cells, because it's likely that these, I have this here as viral RNA, getting inside specific immune cells, long lived immune cells, natural killer cells, macrophages, dendritic cells. If that's the case, you can't get it out because some of these immune cells live for a lifetime or many years in some cases. How do you get rid of it? And this is why that principle of dealing with the root cause of the inflammatory process is so critical. You have to address subclinical inflammation so that these things will all settle down in hopefully the short term. When we look at the principle of the root approach, you can see here bowel clearance, the extended fast, reintroduction diet, careful monitoring, looking at toxin removal, and stabilization of the immune system. All of these things are extremely important when you're thinking about how this can be addressed. But this is overall the premise. This is something that could be relevant to everyone. The question is, how is it that we are going to manage it for you? Thank you very much for listening, and we look forward to sharing more information with you in the near future. Great. Just hang fire for me as I put that together. Just hold on for me 1 second. Great. That was just that root presentation put together. So, yes, if you have some questions with regards to this concept, and I'm going to focus primarily on this idea of spike protein and spike protein persistence. If this is something that you are interested in talking about, and you can see the link here, then try and jump in with me into the studio. One question, short period of time. Let's see how that works. Let's see if anybody wants to join. But the premise is that this study here that was done can essentially highlight the fact that this is what we had predicted some time ago. All of the indications were that spike protein was persisting and it was driving relevant symptoms for people. How we address it, how we get rid of it, how we protect against it, that's going to be the challenge for the next few years. There is no easy way out of this, quite frankly. And anyone who tries to give you the impression that this is easy, I don't think that's accurate. But it's a very important paper. Here's another thing that I didn't mention before. When you look at the paper in more detail, and for those people who don't know, you have to look at the names here. At the bottom here is Professor Akiko Iwasaki, Department of Immunobiology in Yale University, USA. This person here is probably one of the top researchers in the world when it comes to the immunobiology. And so it's very, very important that this research, therefore, had to be released because it had such an impact in terms of health and the relationship to health. So let's see if we have somebody who is willing to join me and have a quick chat, quick question. I'm just going to fix something here with regards to the layout, and then we will get started here. So let's see if we have any questions at the moment. Here, that we've got here Faraz from the UK. Thank you very much for joining us, Faraz. What's your question or what do you want to say?
Good evening, Dr. McMillan. in in the mold toxin disease, you can use cholestyramine and things like that to pull out the mycotoxins. Do you think that's feasible in COVID?
Very, very interesting question there that Faraz has asked. Yes, now this is going to be the kind of question that we have to address, Faraz, is that when we think about the characteristics of the spike protein, it depends on where it is. So, say for instance, when you're thinking of mold toxicity, much of that may actually be primarily in the lungs. Anything that can bind to abnormal proteins and help the body to get rid of it is likely to be beneficial. In the context of the spike protein, my instinct is that it's not like with regards to mold just in tissue, it's actually in cells. And so, therefore, the only way that I think that we can easily do it is to get it out of the cells and then help the body to get rid of it. So it's a double phase. Is one, you have to help the cells to get rid of it, and then you have to bind it and get it out of the system. There are people who are working at that to try and see if they can figure out strategies. So I think that's a really good question. Thank you very, very much. Much appreciated. We have someone else who wants to join us here. Here we have Jane. Now, Jane, when you jump on, say where you're from, and then you can ask your question. You're muted at the moment, Jane, and we can see the roof, but we can't see you. Um, Jane, can you hear me? Yes, you have to unmute yourself. You're muted at the moment. I'll let you try and figure that out. But yes, in terms of what Faraz had just said, very important point that we're going to need to use all the strategies we can to try and get and handle this situation. Jane, one last chance. You are still muted. You have to click the microphone button so that you can be unmuted so that you can then ask your question. But yes, so these are some of the challenges that we're going to have over the next few years, and we're going to have to get very creative in order to try and address these problems and look at ways and strategies to deal with it. Very sorry, Jane, but we can't hear you at the moment, and so we'll have to pull you off screen. But look out for the next time that we have one of these open house sessions where we just take questions and discuss with people. So just finally, I'll look and see if there are any questions. uh, Need to know if cells are still producing spike proteins and how long they keep producing the spike. Yes, that is really the big question, Brett, that we have to try and see if we can figure out which ones are involved. And this is where it's very important to try and figure out the history of the person and see what is it that they are struggling with, because that can sometimes give us the clue. One important factor that I'd noticed with long COVID symptoms, and it will therefore apply with post-vaccination syndrome, is that literally almost any part of the body, if inflamed, can become a residual location for spike protein. So even things like benign prostatic hypertrophy, if there was prostatitis and inflammation, could potentially be a residue. For women, endometriosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, all of these things can then cause problems and become residual locations with inflammation. The principle is subclinical inflammation has to be addressed in order for us to get out of this problem. So, thank you all very much for being with me. And again, we will continue to talk, and I'll keep you updated on the latest information. And yes, I'll answer one last question here. Faraz has mentioned about COVID-19 being airborne AIDS. I've heard this many times, and what I'll say is that there is definitely dysregulation of the immune system and there is definitely a suppression of the immune system. But in terms of AIDS destroying, say, the CD4 cells, I don't think we see it as significantly in terms of COVID 19. It tends to be more transient suppression. And in that transient suppression period, that's when you can then have an almost an increased susceptibility to infection, similar to what you would have with AIDS. But AIDS, unless treated, is far more destructive to the immune system. But we still can't underestimate COVID 19. And so, yes, we have to remain balanced in our thinking and always look at answers to try and make sense of it. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you very much.